So the last video we showed you how to bond this ceiling, getting ready for over skimming, and today we're going to show you how to skim it. So keep watching and enjoy the show. So we've let the bonding coat go off inside enough now that it's ready to take the finished coat of plaster. So what we're going to use in this instance is this Thistle multi-finish plaster. So this is the perfect skim to use in this application. We've got a few different surfaces. So we've got the bonding coat, which is quite a high suction, and then we've got the plasterboard, which is quite low suction. So this plaster is ideal for this application. You could use board finish because the bonding is quite fresh on there, so it's not going to have a massive amount of suction, so it wouldn't really hurt just to use board finish, but just to err on the side of caution, we're going to use the multi for today. What we're going to do is make sure all our tools are clean, all our buckets are clean, and that we're using fresh water. Some plasterers, if they're doing a small area, may use dirty water. What that does is speeds up the process of the curing time of the plaster. Although that does work to a certain extent, it can actually damage the integrity of the plaster, which obviously is it really worth it for the sake of half an hour? Always use clean water in my opinion. What you need to do as a general rule of thumb, if you're wanting a full bucket of plaster, fill just over halfway and that will give you then a full bucket. In this instance, I do not want all that plaster for that ceiling, so I'll just put in enough water that I need. Over time, you'll get used to exactly the quantities that you need. I believe they recommend about 11.5 litres per 25 kilo bag, but you'll get used to it over time, like I said. So what we're going to do now is get it mixed and ready. Also as well, if you're indoors mixing up, wear a mask because this stuff is even worse than the bonding. It creates big plumes of dust, but we're outside, so we've got plenty of ventilation. So all I'm going to do, same principle as the bonding coat, I'm going to pour this bag in, give it a mix, add a bit more if I need to, add some water if I need to, just to get the desired consistency. So here we go. Now I know the amount of water that I've got in there will take over a full bag, so I'm just going to go ahead and pour this whole bag in. You can see the amount of dust this is creating. So obviously if you're inside a room, this is not going to be blowing away nicely as it is now, so like I say, wear a mask. Straight in with a bit more, just make yourself a little mound on top, that way then you know it's thickening up through the water. Again, slow to start, just until it gets a bit thicker, because it will make splashes like this. If you go full trigger straight away, it might start spitting out everywhere at you. Get all that powder mixed in. Alright, now add some more. So I can feel it starting to thicken up in the bucket. So I know I've got enough in there now. This isn't mixing through as easily, so I'm definitely on the right track. So just stir the whisk around, give it a good mix up together. What I'm going to do is just grab my bucket trowel, just go around the outside, get any extra bits off, any bits that are clinging to the side. And then carry on stirring. So now I'm going to add a bit of water. Adding water just helps take the lumps out a bit, rather than trying to add more plaster to get right first time with your consistency. It's always better to mix it a little bit thicker and then add water in to thin it down. I'm just going to stop there for a second. Just clean the edges of my bucket off, because we know that if I leave dry bits on there, you're never going to get it mixed through properly. So just give it a quick scoop around the edges. If you have a smaller bucket, it will take a less amount of time to mix it, obviously because it's a big bucket. I've got a lot of plaster to turn around in there, so it's going to take quite a while. But as soon as the lumps have gone, stop mixing straight away. You don't need to keep mixing it once all the lumps are gone. Right, so I can see now that all the lumps have gone, so I'm going to stop mixing right away. If you overmix it, it can affect the setting time of the plaster. It can make it go off a little bit quicker, so if you put it on a ceiling or a large area, you don't want that to happen. This is the consistency that I'm looking for. Some people like it different, some people like it wetter, some people like it thicker. It's all down to personal preference really. It will have no impact or no negative impact on the plaster if it's wetter or thicker. It just means it will take longer or slower to go off depending. So, as before, clean all your tools off again, clean the mixer straight away. Today's a pretty warm day, so if I was just to do that, tap that off, leave it there, go in, carry on skimming. When I come back out, that's going to be dry. So clean it straight away. The extra 30 seconds it takes, yeah, just do it and it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Tom, you've got to help me. We've got to get this big bucket inside. So we've got the beast up on the scaffold. Cheers, Tom. And now what I'm going to do, Hawk and trowel, clean and wet and ready. One thing, always keep your tools clean. It's one of the first things I was taught when I got into site. Clean tools, clean job, so it's very important. You don't want bits of plaster all over your trowel because that's just going to transfer into the plaster that you're applying and it's going to cause you no problems with dragging and all that sort of stuff. So clean tools, clean work. So as before, a little bit of plaster on the trowel just to prime up your hawk and trowel. Because again, if you just to put plaster straight on a wet hawk, as soon as you do that, it's just going to go on the floor. So just a little bit of priming and that's it, you're good to go. Load a bit onto my hawk. I'm just going to go gentle at first with a little bit, just to assess the situation. So with a ceiling, it's slightly different to a wall. Being right-handed, I work from left to right. If you're left-handed, work right to left. That's just a general rule of thumb whether you're doing walls or ceilings. And what you do is you will start in one corner and you'll pull out as far as you can. On this ceiling, I'm quite fortunate that when I do my pull like this, I'm going to be able to go over halfway. So then when I come back across from that side, I will then be able to pull back and meet in the middle, and that's fine. If it was a larger ceiling, then what you'd have to do is pull back to a certain point, say here, and then work your way back across to the left side, and then scoop around like that and apply and go over and cover this central part where you get to. Okay, it's a little bit difficult to explain. I'll try and explain it a bit more when I've got some plaster on the ceiling so you'll see what I'm on about. But for now, for this ceiling, I'm going to start in this corner, work my way back as far as I can and then right the way across. Get your plaster on the trowel and straight out with it. You'll notice that I haven't PVA'd or added any sort of bonding agent to this bonding. That is because it's only recently been applied. If you're going to do this the day after or something like that, you know, come in, get all the bonding done, then come back the next day, I'd definitely recommend using something like a bonding agent, like Thistle Bond It or Blue Grit or something like that, just to make sure it helps reduce the suction, because once the bonding is dry, it will be a very high suction background, basically. So you need to make sure that you put a suitable priming agent on there, otherwise the areas where you've bonded and where you skim over will go very quickly, they'll dry very quickly. So like you've just seen there, I've started here, I've pulled out so I know exactly how far I can get to, which is just about halfway. I probably need to go a little bit further, to be honest. Then I've pulled all these corners out and then I've run my trowel flat along here. That way then I know there's no dips there and I know that this is nice and flat throughout this first pull. So now what I'm going to do is just go straight across here now. I like to start just a little bit away from the corner. Quite a flat angle on the trowel, smudging it out as you go. Same principle as you did with the bonding. And there you go. You're not looking for a perfectly flat finish here. You're literally just getting this first coat on, just to get a nice covering. Once you're on, you're then going to go over it again to flatten it off anyway. So there's no need to get this perfectly flat at this stage. You're not looking for a paint finish now. If you try and do that, all you're going to end up doing is basically playing around with the plaster too much and you're wasting time, valuable time, which I mentioned before. As soon as you start mixing the plaster, it starts going off. So it's literally a race against the clock. So you don't want to mess around with it at all. You just want to get it on there and then deal with it once it's on. Applying moderate pressure just to squeeze it on there. It shouldn't be causing you any discomfort or anything like that at the minute, because like I say, you're not applying any pressure. You're literally just smearing the plaster straight on the ceiling. So, what I've done now, we're going over this side. So like I mentioned, this light here is in the centre of the room. So with my first pull, I've managed to pull past it, okay? So if this ceiling was, say, another 3 foot that way or whatever, I wouldn't then be able to come over this corner and bring that back in and pull it into there. So what I would have to do is return over to this side, and then I would apply the plaster from here back with the same motion at the end, and then come round and cover myself here like this, yeah? Just like that, applying the plaster that way and then work my way all the way across again. And then when I can then reach back into that line of plaster, I'll come over to this side. So you've seen me now apply the first coat. You've seen the direction in which we do it, the way in which we apply it, and basically the whole process of the first coat. It's pretty straightforward really. So now what I'm going to do is go and clean out all the tools, clean out the buckets. One thing you should also know as well, there is a little bit left in here. Yeah, I'd always advise to mix up a little bit more than what you need. Obviously when you're first starting out, you're not going to know exactly how much you need. It's all a bit of a learning curve, but just try if you can mix up a little bit more, because the last thing you want to do is get to having a square metre left on your ceiling or your wall and then not having enough and having to go stop and go and mix up another batch. Because like I mentioned, once you mix up that plaster, it's going off. So all this plaster will be going off at one rate, and then your fresh mix there will be going off at another rate. So it could cause you problems down the line. You can do it, it's fine, but it's a little bit of a balancing act then when you're actually troweling it. So I'm going to go and get all this cleaned off now, and then hopefully by the time I've done that, I'll be able to drop back in and get all this first coat flattened off, and then we'll go back outside and mix up for coat number 2. Right, so we've given it a couple of minutes, and now what we're going to do is flatten it. The reason we do this in between the coats is just basically to knock any lines off, any bits like this. We flatten these down so then when you come to put your second coat on, it's nice and easy and straightforward for you to do so. The idea of the second coat is to basically amalgamate, that's a big word for me, in with the first coat. You're not trying to have 2 separate coats, you're trying to make them both as one. And that second coat is a very thin coat that just literally fills in any imperfections. So by flattening this coat off, you make that second coat that much more straightforward. So it's an extra step that not all plasterers do, but if you don't do it, you should be doing it. First of all, I'm going to use one of these. This appears to be very controversial. This is just the way I was taught to do the snots, or the little bits of plaster here in the corner. A lot of plasterers just use their trowel and run it across like that, just to clear the snots away. But then what I find is you get them all over your trowel. You're either doing this, or you got to go to your bucket and brush them off. Doing that, you get plaster all over you. So with one of these, all you have to do is run it across like this. Run it across like that. And then back over the odd bit that it hasn't got. Scrape, scrape, done. So in my opinion, I'm not saying everybody should do it, but I like to use one of these. I just think they're a really handy tool to have. Also, over time, your trowel, the corners on your trowel will end up like that. With a lot of usage, the corners round off slightly. So this gets right in the corner if there's ever any bits that you can't quite get to with your trowel. So again, I'm just going to run across this edge here. It's important to get rid of these snots because what they are effectively is little dry bits of plaster on the corners. So if you have a dry bit of plaster and you pull that into a wetter bit of plaster, all it's going to do is cause a big drag line. So it's just good practice to keep your edges nice and clean and clear of any obstructions as you go along. That way then further down the line, when you come into trowel up for example for your final trowels, you're not going to end up dragging any hard bits of plaster, because as you go further through the process of plastering, it's a lot harder to fix a problem like that. Not saying it can't be done, but it just makes life more difficult. So it makes sense just to clean the snots off and your corners off as you go. So I'm just applying minimal pressure now. I'm keeping my trowel pretty flat, as you can see. If I was going to hold it too much like this, all I'm going to do is take off too much skim. So I don't want to do that. I'm not trying to remove any plaster whatsoever. I'm trying to just flatten it down. You will naturally get a little bit of fat coming off, but that's just the process, that's what happens. It just drags any high bits off, you see, so that's why you will get a little bit. But if you start taking loads of fat off, then you've got too steep an angle on your trowel. So make sure you hold it flatter. And all I'm doing is pulling straight out like that, coming across, wiping a bit of fat on there so I can squeeze that back in, and then just an additional trowel back in to get me to the start. Pull it out, squeeze it back in. Obviously, make sure you're working in a safe area so you can safely step back, knowing that you're not going to go down a hole or anything like that. It is good to make sure you have got a good space like this to skim a ceiling. Obviously, if you're doing it off steps, you're going to have a limited reach, so you're not going to be able to do as long a pull as I'm doing here. But you can see now,
Just looking down it, it's looking nice and flat already. Again, we're not looking for a perfect finish at this stage because we've still got a few more processes to go through and before the finished product. You're just looking to knock those lines off, and if there are any big hollows, just squeeze a bit of fat into them and you're away. I know a lot of plasterers do despise using small tools or think it's a bad idea, and that's fair enough, each their own. But if you are interested in giving it a try, maybe you've been plastering for years and never even thought of using one, there's some affiliate links below. Take you straight to Amazon, you'll be able to get one of these, they're only a few quid. What's the harm? Give it a try, you might like it. Okay, that's it. First coat's flattened. Now I'm just going to leave that for a little while, but I'm only going to leave that while I'm mixing up the second coat. You don't want this to go too hard because, like I mentioned before, you're then going to end up with two separate coats sitting on top of each other. You want them both to be one coat. So don't let this go off too much. Get straight out there, get your plaster mixed up, and then get on with the second coat. Cool, let's go outside. So I'm just in the process now of applying the second coat. I haven't left it to go off too long, as I said. It's still slightly damp. It's not wet by any means, but at the same time, it hasn't gone off fully yet either. So I just need to make sure that both these coats amalgamate as one. What we're looking for on this coat, the first coat was basically a covering coat, but this coat, you're looking to be pretty tidy, fill in any hollows, and just to make sure that you've got a pretty flat surface. Again, don't look out for like a paint finish quality on this because you're not going to get that at this stage. You're still applying a wet product. You will only start to get, a really nice finish on it once the product's actually started drying. So don't mess around with it too much. Just get it on, get it fairly flat, relatively flat, and then move on to the next section. It's applied in the same way and in the same direction as before, as the first coat. Once we're all on, we'll give it a flatten across it, a cross trowel or a cross flattening, whatever you want to call it. But I'll explain that process in more depth when we get there. So yeah, literally just get this coat on, nice and neat. You can see, hopefully you can see, it's pretty neat, pretty flat. There's no hollows or anything like that, no big lines in it. That's the look you're going for at this stage. This is my old faithful Tyzac trowel, 14-inch. I have 3 of these. It's what I was taught with. It's what I've always stuck with. It's actually a Spear and Jackson make Tyzac, but they've been around for a very long time and it's a really good finishing trowel, to be honest. A lot of people, the vast majority of people, I only know a few of the plasterers that actually use Tyzac. Most people use Marshalltown, but these have just got a slightly narrower blade on them. I just prefer it. Personally, each to their own, Right, so that is the second coat on, boom, just like that. Same as the first coat, same process is involved. What I'm going to do now is just quickly wash my trowel off, and before I clean anything out, I'm just going to quickly cross trowel this. So what I mean by cross troweling, you will see in a second. So plaster by its nature is made of rock, okay? So there's very, very small grains in there. So what this means, when you're applying the plaster, you apply it in one direction. What happens is it tends to drag and pulls the grain with it, okay? So if you continuously just go the same way over and over again, what's going to happen is you're going to get an effect called tiger stripes, which looks exactly like that, just lots and lots of stripes all in, and it can cause imperfections that wave in the ceiling. So what we do to remedy that is a few times throughout the process we do a thing called cross troweling. Pretty simple. All we're going to do is get our trowel and we're going to go across, so perpendicular to the way that we've been applying the plaster, just like that. I'm not looking for anything major, I'm literally just pulling the grain the opposite direction. Yeah, I'm not trying to take out any imperfections or anything like that. I'm literally just running my trowel across, applying very gentle pressure. If there are a bit of, anything in the corner, there's no harm in sorting it out. But I'm keeping a very flat trowel as well, as you can see. And I'm just going across the grain like that. Different plasterers will do this at different times, different stages throughout the process. This is just the way that I do it. I'm not saying this is the right way. I'm not saying it's the wrong way. I'm just saying this is how and when I do my first cross trowel. We will cross trowel the ceiling again, but this is the first one. I find this works well just to pull the grain the other way so that when the plaster's gone off a little bit more and we come to flatten it, we're not then creating our tiger stripes. So if you look up, what you can see, the bit that I've gone over here, yeah, you can see no grain marks at all, okay? It's just pretty smooth and pretty good. Whereas if you look over here, where I haven't cross troweled it, you can see lines. Not this line here, but lines in the grain. Yeah, just gentle lines that are in there, and that is the grain pulling. So if I left that now and flattened over that, I'm just gonna create an even bigger problem, big tiger stripes, and then when it gets further on down the process and the plaster becomes drier, it's gonna be a lot harder to remedy. So by cross troweling at this point, yeah, when the plaster's still wet, still pliable, it just pulls the grain in the opposite direction to what you've applied it, and just makes life a lot easier. Obviously, if you're doing this off steps, you're going to have to pull it across in different sections. So like I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to do it in that certain way. So you'll have to work from one corner and pull it across like that, and then just work your way. You'll figure it out. Watch the video back to that bit where I explained it. But obviously in this instance, I've got my trestles, I've got my little scaffold set up, so I can just nicely walk across here, no worries, and get this nice and flat. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get this all flattened out now, all cross troweled across the whole ceiling, and then I'm going to leave it. A little bit of something in there, get that out now. If there are any little bits like this, get them out while the plaster's still wet, because if that drags when it's gone hard, it's a bit more of a mission to get it out. You can see I've actually took quite a bit of fat off. Although my trowel is flat, I've took quite a lot of fat off there, and that's because it's helping take out any undulations in the ceiling. Not because I'm taking unnecessary plaster off, it's just taking away any high bits that are on there that shouldn't be. So that's it, that has had the first cross trowel. So now what I'm going to do is head outside, get all my tools and my buckets cleaned out, and then come back in ready for the next flatten. So what I'm doing is basically a few things. First of all, looking at it. So when it starts to go a bit more matte and less shiny, you know the moisture's obviously going out of it. And also the touch test. What I'm going to do is just put my hand on it, and you can see it's just making a slight indent, very, very slight. You can feel the moisture in it, but you don't, if your fingers go right into it, then it's too wet, you need to leave it alone. But it's good, just test a couple of different places, because obviously I've got bonding on the ceiling as well as plasterboard, so it is going to dry slightly differently. So just need to get an overall feel for it. And it is still a little bit damp in places, but obviously where the bonding is, like here, that's pretty much ready. So I'm just gonna give it a couple more minutes and then we'll go for it. So what I have, I'm probably not going to need this at this stage, but I have it anyway just to clean my trowel off or anything like that. This is called a paddle brush. Some people use smaller brushes, but I like to use this because it's big and holds a lot of water, and the bristles are nice and soft. So when you brush across to apply water, it doesn't leave big drag marks in it. That's why the longer bristles are also better than the shorter bristles, because it tends to be a bit stiffer if they're shorter bristles. So this just naturally flexes and applies water evenly. Then I've got my Old Faithful small tool and my tickler, which is a smaller brush, which is used in the latter stages for basically brushing the edges in to seal the edges in. And then obviously the trowel. So if you're plastering and you've got a bucket of water in there that you're going to use as a splash bucket, make sure you protect the area around it, because no matter how hard you try, you will get wet around it. Obviously we're on some bits of ply, so I'm not concerned about damaging the floor below, because the floor below is also protected. We wet it just to make sure the material doesn't dry up straight away on it, because all you're going to do is just cause drag marks all over your ceiling or your wall. Clean those knots off. You can use your trowel like I've said before, but this is just how I like to do it. It's my preferred technique. Also, it helps if there is a little bit of a ramp in the corner, just where it's bulbed slightly, you can just trim that out nicely, nice and easily with your small tool. Because at this stage now, you're looking for nice tidy corners. You don't want to leave any holes or anything anywhere now, because you're getting towards the latter stages of plastering where the plaster is starting to go off to harden. So you want to be keeping this nice and tidy now. So the flattening stage, all we're going to do is apply moderate pressure to the ceiling. We're going to keep the trowel nice and flat. We're not going to do this because we're going to remove material from the ceiling or from the wall, and you do not want that, because what you're doing is taking your second coat away and you want to leave that in there. Like I said, nice flat trowel. I'm applying a bit of pressure now because the plaster is tucked in enough to take that. I have took a little bit away, but that's completely fine given the area that I've just gone over. And then I'm going to just run my trowel along like this. Seal those corners in again. Make sure the corners are nice and square as well. And then just pull out from these corners here, just to make sure it's all sealed in and flat nicely. You can see the trowel's nice and flat as well. If there are any bits, any hollows, now is the time to fill them in. Because once the plaster's gone past a certain point, it's going to be very difficult to fill it in. You're going to end up filling it in with fat, which isn't ideal. You're going to leave marks everywhere, and then when you come to paint it, you will see those areas. It may look flat now, but once you've got a lick of paint on there, you will definitely notice the difference. So here as well, a little bit of paint has just come off this coving. Really important that before I go over that with my trowel again, I get rid of that. Because what's going to happen is my trowel's going to pick that up and it's going to pull it. And if I don't notice until I'm about here, I'm going to have a drag line all the way through there that I've got to try and get rid of. So what you might notice is, while I'm pulling away from that edge, when I go back, I actually go back with my trowel as well, rather than just doing this, pulling out from this edge and then walking back to here. You can do that, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but I just see it as a way of adding that extra little bit of flattening power in. You've got to get from that point to that point, so why not use your trowel in the process? Another thing to note as well, while I'm going along here, I'm actually just looking in this area behind my trowel to make sure there's no hollows or any issues in that area. My trowel is 14 inches. All I need to do is look at this much area. If I flatten all this area without really paying that much attention, I'm just going along and not really seeing what I'm doing, I then have to come back and check this whole area. Okay, which I don't want to be doing. It's a lot easier, a lot more time conscious, just to concentrate on the area that you're flattening. So this is all pulling in nicely now, it's firming up nicely, it's flattening off really well. Like I mentioned earlier about mixing everything up in one go, so you've got enough or just over enough to make sure that you can get on the whole area that you're plastering in one hit. What would happen if I hadn't, if I'd have done it in two separate mixes? If I'd have got, for example, 3/4 of this ceiling on and then stopped and made another mix and then finished the ceiling, put the rest of the ceiling on with another mix. This bit now, this area that I'm doing, which is nice and flattening well, would be good, and then the other area, once I get to that, would potentially still be wet, so I'd have to hang around for that area over there or wherever it was to pull in more so it's ready to be flattened. By the time I waited around, the first mix could have gone well off and it's going to mess up your timing. So ideally, you really want to just get everything on with one bucket, with one mix. If you've got a labourer, it's a completely different story because he can just be constantly mixing you at buckets and it's all going off in a relatively time sequential way, you know, it's all going off together, it works well that way. But if you're on your own, just try and mix up enough for the hit that you're doing. It's another one of John's top tips. Always keep the top of your trowel clean as well, so you don't have any bits there, any dry bits. If there are any dry bits on your trowel, just wash them straight off. Or you can just stick them on the end of your bucket like that as well, because if there is any nicks in the plaster anywhere at any stage, you've got a bit there just to fill them back in. When you're pulling the corners through like this, the top of your trowel does tend to clog up a little bit, or your corners like this, there's some dry stuff on there. Yeah, so just get rid of that, because again, that can just pull the plaster. And especially at this stage, you don't really want that now, once the plaster's starting to go off, because it can be quite hard to rectify. See how it's starting to show here, because it's drying in certain areas. So gentle flick of water, try not to hit the cameraman. And there you go, we're all good. I'm just going over where I've pulled to here with my first pull, and then I'm going over that again here just to make sure I've covered all the area and I'm not leaving anything out. This corner's dried quite quickly here, that's why you just saw me brush a bit of water in. You'll get used to exactly how much water you need to put on, just to bring it back to life a little bit. So I'm just applying a little bit more water now, because it is starting to dry up a bit. It is a very warm day, so heat will affect the plaster, especially as we're doing a ceiling. Obviously heat rises, so you're up here in the warmest part of the room. The plaster is going to dry quicker than it would if you were doing the wall. Also, cold weather can affect it, can affect the plaster, increase the drying times. The way plaster dries, the way the chemicals work, I believe, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it generates heat, which helps dry it out. So obviously if the area is cold, it's going to take a lot longer for that reaction to happen. And when it's warm, you guessed it, it will be quicker. Also, another thing that you need to be careful of, as tempting as it is to open a window to let a bit of air in, it can be a very bad idea, because once you have a warm breeze blowing against your ceiling or your wall, all that tends to do is actually dry out the top coat, your second coat, quicker than the first coat. And then you'll have some serious issues. You'll have a lot of shelling because that bottom coat is still wet and your top coat is dry. It just wants to peel away from it. So as painful as it is, just keep the windows shut and avoid any breeze at all if you can, because the wind is not your friend when you're plastering. Okay, so that is the flatten done. So we've cross-troweled it, now we've flattened it, now we leave it. And then once it's gone off a little bit more, then we can give it a wet trowel, same direction as we just have, and then finally we'll give it a cross trowel. So there's quite a few processes that go into it, but again, it's all about timing with plaster. Don't go over it straight away because it's still moist. There's still a lot of moisture in there. You need it to dry out a little bit more before you can actually polish this plaster up and get it nice and flat and smooth, the plaster and the finish that you're looking for. So I've given this now enough time to go off. What you're looking for is to be able to touch it and not make any marks at all. But you want to still feel a little bit of moisture in there. You don't want it to be fully gone off because you're not going to be able to do anything otherwise. When you put your trowel over it, it's not going to actually make any difference. You're just going to be applying water to a hard surface. So the point of this is that it's gone off enough that you can apply some water to it, which is enough to lubricate the trowel, to go across and to push all that grain in nicely and give you that finish that we're looking for. So wet your brushes, wet your trowel. So hopefully your corners are nice and tidy anyway because you've been using your small tool. And then just run your trowel or your small tool in the corner just to take away any excess.
Okay, and then what we're going to do, like you saw me before, I was just flicking a bit of water on. But if you also remember, I mentioned that we're going to use this brush now to brush water in. That's why I go for a brush like this. Run it across like that. Apply some water. Pour your corners in. And then go for it. Now what I'm doing is, there's a bit of a greater angle on my trowel. I'm not holding it too flat because I'm effectively trying to cut across the surface. It's not too steep, but again, I'm sort of, I don't know, what's that, 45 degrees maybe, 40 degrees-ish. And now we're applying a fair amount of pressure onto this. Because it's dried enough, we can do that without removing too much of the material. You can see that I've got a small amount of fat on my trowel. Pull that corner out there, and then we go for the big pull now. There we go. So what you're looking to do is apply this. As you're applying the pressure, the fat and the water will work its way to the edge of your trowel. That's why you work from one side to the next. I'm right-handed like I mentioned, so I'm going to work left to right. Reason being, the heel of the trowel will always kick out the fat. So if I was to go from right to left, as I'm doing that, I'm going to leave marks, yeah? So the trowel's here, the marks are there. If I was then to go there, I'd leave marks there. So by working left to right, you're constantly covering your fat lines. Okay, work the fat back in like that, and then apply your pressure back to your halfway line or to wherever you come in. See, so that fat line that was there is now there, so I'm working my way nicely across the ceiling. Once you've pulled away from the corner, get your tickler and just gently brush, just to seal that corner in. Just helps remove any excess as well. Just gets it all finished in nicely. It will leave a very slight mark, but obviously the corners are going to be brushed in anyway, so you're not going to see that. And if it is too much, then there's nothing that the dry trowel won't sort out later. And just brush that in nice and neat, and there you go. All sealed in nicely. Keep your trowel clean as you do this process. A little bit of fat on your trowel isn't a problem because you can just work that back in as you're going across. Keep the ceiling nice and lubricated with plenty of water. And then nice bit of pressure. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you did have a window or a door open and you had your breeze coming through, it would be at this stage, it would cause you problems. So the shelling that I mentioned about the top coat drying before the bottom coat could be quite severe. And the way to remedy it is it's quite difficult without showing you, but literally get some fat, squeeze it in, squeeze it across like this really gently. Don't try and pull your trowel flat across it, because all you're going to do is pull more off. Literally just squeeze a lot of fat into it like that and just leave it. Carry on with the rest of the ceiling and the rest of the wall, and then come back a bit later once the fat's dried into it, because what that does is applies extra moisture into that top coat. Yeah, and then once you've done that, then use your trowel and cut across it. So a sharp angle and just gently cut across like that. And then that should hopefully remove any of the shelling and just leave you a nice flat surface. It won't be perfect if you get shelling. It's always the big risk that it could leave marks there, but that's the best way to remedy it really. That is it. We've troweled it up nicely with a wet trowel. Now all that's left is the piece de resistance, just to make this nice and smooth and shiny and take any knobbles away. It's the cross trowel. So what we're going to do, clean off your trowel totally. The trowel is nice and clean. Just literally do what we did before with our cross trowel. Yeah, but we're going to apply a little bit of water this time. We're just going to go across. And we're going to pull that back. And the reason we're going backwards with this is because of our fat line. If we came back with our trowel that way, what we're going to do is push the fat off the heel again, so we're going to end up with a fat line. Back across. And then the moisture that's in that fat will then carry off onto the next bit.
A bit more water. And if you can see with my trowel, it's at quite a steep angle. It's not flat. It's not flat like that, it's like this. So I'm 45 degrees that way, and 45 degrees that way. So I'm effectively cutting across the plaster. You shouldn't be getting a lot of fat off at this point. It should literally just be excess water really. Just navigate around these bits. Any cables or surfaces in your way, and all I'm doing is obviously taking out any last minute imperfections, taking any little knobbles that are on there off, and giving it that perfect finish that we're looking for. So when I get to this point now, what I'm going to do is not apply any more water, because I want to make sure that the fat line that I've got there disappears. So I need to work that either onto my trowel or back into the ceiling. So if I keep applying water, I'm just going to keep creating more fat. So by the time I've got to this point here, you should be adding no water. It's literally just a dry trowel, and you're using the fat that is already on there just to lubricate the surface. And I'm just trying to pull that fat away like that. So that is that cross trowel finished. Now what we're going to do is just a dry trowel straight across, just to finish it off neatly. Applying a bit of pressure, not too much, because I don't want to drag anything. You can hear the difference now in the trowel. It's smooth. The noise that the trowel makes will tell you a lot about what stage the plaster's at and what the finish is going to be like. You're just looking for that smooth, gliding noise. I'll shut up for a second so you can probably hear it. Just keep your trowel wet at this stage. You're not applying any water to the ceiling. Just your trowel, just to make sure it's lubricated enough that it's not going to cause any dragging issues.
So guys, that's it. Hopefully I've shown you now that with a few tools and a bit of know-how, you too can achieve results like this. However, I'd just like to give you a bit of a disclaimer. Plastering isn't for everybody. Although it seems like it may be easy, taking on a project like this may be beyond some people's reaches. So I would always recommend that you consult a professional or get a professional in to do the job for you. With that being said, hopefully you found this video informative and enjoyable. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe. You've been watching me, John from Build with A&E. Until next time, stay safe.